on. Welcome everyone back. This is another episode of the GTM Kickback, the number one go-to-market leadership interview and strategy podcast in the world. I'm Joey Brodsky and I'm your host. And today we've got another fantastic guest, Mr. Jeremey. I meant to ask you how to pronounce your last name, so I didn't butcher it, Jeremey. I'm so sorry. Jeremey Spijker, is that right?
Well, I would say Spijker, but I accept Spijker as well.
Jeremey Spijker of Winning by Design. I'll give you a quick bio on this guy because it is absolutely tremendous, the background and I guess history in the space that you've come from, right? So Jeremey started his career in management consulting and early on transitioned to B2B SaaS sales. In his early days, he was exposed to the consulting and training services from Winning by Design. While his career progressed and he moved into sales leadership roles, he always brought on Winning by Design to help implement scientific-based GTM processes and train his teams accordingly. Until 2 years ago, when Winning by Design approached him to come on board and help scale their European side of the business. Ever since, he has been working with over 50 companies to help them bring science to their GTM strategy and operations as a revenue architect, and more recently as a managing director. He is also an advisor to a handful of startups in England and Europe and enjoys playing golf in his spare time. Lovely. Welcome and thank you for joining, Jeremey. I really appreciate it.
The pleasure is all mine. Thanks for having me.
I know I've given the brief bio, but would you mind just self-introducing, telling a little bit about what it means to work at Winning by Design for those who may not know, and sort of your role as a consultant day-to-day to these organizations?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's funny. We often come across companies that are not familiar with Winning by Design, but they are familiar with our IP, right? And I guess that's one of the things that we try to do, right? Really help companies to improve the way that they're operating in their go-to-market space by doing a lot of research and development. Speak with a lot of companies out there to understand what's working for you, what's not, and why is it not, and spread the word, right? And we believe that science is an important role in that, right? I think the time where sales was considered a martial art and was only for the select few is behind us, and we look at sales or go to market as a science, right? It's a set of processes, and if well executed, you are very successful. And we're very inspired by many people that have done research in this space. And I think one of the concepts that we believe in is, for example, the Kaizen model, right? Where they believe that splitting up your processes in small micro steps and then optimizing each of those micro steps is going to help you to be successful. And a good example of that is, for example, sales, right? Often we hear, we need to double our revenue, or we need to triple our revenue. So we need to double our leads or triple our leads, right? Whereas if you break down your sales process in 6 or 7 steps, and you are able to improve each of these steps by 10%, you'll also get there, right? You'll also double in revenue, right? Without having to double your leads. So I think that's where we come in. We try to bring that science into your processes, help you by creating the right enablement to enable your team to work against that process, provide training services. And we do that with hundreds of companies worldwide, and also in Europe, and that's where I come in.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's really interesting because when you think about like traditional sales, and I want to get into our actual topic, which is the modeling of sales organizations or revenue organizations rather, and this concept of pods, which is very derivative of what you just gave. Traditional sales is so qualitative in nature, right? Like it's very much a feeling and a charisma and like a coolness about it, or the opposite for those that might not be as inclined to it. And it's been really interesting as I've gotten to the SaaS world over the last 5 years even, and I'm sure it's been happening and trending upwards ever since the increase of data and quantifiable decision making and quantifiable evidence to build organizations has just scaled dramatically, to the point where it's just inexcusable to not base most of the things that you do in building and growing and managing and deriving your sales organization off of real data, because there's so much out there for us to consume. I mean, like courtesy of things like Salesforce for the last 20 years and what they've built, right? Um, I guess, have you seen that similar trend? Is that a lot of what this is? And do you take a lot of quantifiable evidence over the qualitative stuff?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, it all
Yeah.
starts with data, right?
Yeah.
In order for it to be scientific, you need to be able to measure it, right? In order to be able to improve it, and the only way that we can measure this is by understanding the math behind it, right? And when I started my sales career 7, 8 years ago, I think that's very illustrative of it. We hadn't heard of this RevOps role, right? Which is now, every serious go-to-market organization has this RevOps role. And I think
Yeah.
it's illustrative of the importance, right, of being able to have a constant idea of what's moving the needle for the organization, right? What's happening on a day-to-day. We want to be able to see that real time. And I think that is only going to become more important in the future.
Well, let's talk about our actual topic today. So, the title of this podcast is um, Revenue Team Structure Building in Pods. Can you tell me about this really interesting concept of pods that you're helping these organizations put together in terms of how they're structuring the revenue orgs?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we often work together with organizations that they have a ton of money, right? They just did a financial round, and they want to scale really fast. And while doing so, one of the first things that they bump into is that they run into performance issues, right? How is it possible that my team is performing less so a year ago or 2 years ago, right? And I think it all dates back to the organizational structure that we often see within these kind of organizations, right? I refer to them as a metrics organization, where you have a VP marketing that has an SEO specialist, that has a content marketer, et cetera, et cetera. You have a VP of sales that has a couple of SDRs, a couple of account executives, and all of that works fine at a smaller scale, right? Where probably your marketing team and your sales team are sitting regionally at the same location, probably even in the same office on the same floor. So all of
Yeah.
that is fine at these kind of like early stages. But when you start scaling, right, and you start adding regions that you want to work in, you start adding verticals that you want to work in, you start adding more people, of course, in order to be able to serve those regions and verticals, management layers in order to be able to closely manage the reps, the individual contributors. That's when we often see this challenge of performance decrease, right? So what we then often advise is to instead of working in that metrics organization within a marketing team or within a sales team, right? Split up your team, and instead of your account executives all working together, partner your account executive with an SDR, right? And let that SDR and that AE, let them work together and let them take ownership, right, over a particular region or over a particular vertical. Let them become true industry experts over that particular region or over that particular vertical, whatever you would like to work in, or what best fits your organization. And I think that's where we see an answer to many of these questions, right? Things like accountability, right? Also, accountability often decreases with management layers being added on top, or personal objectives, right? Accountability or ownership towards personal objectives is also a big challenge while scaling the organization. And these are just some of the reasons that we often see, right? Continuity is also a really good example, right? What should we do if an account executive falls sick, right? Well, if you have somebody working in a pod together with another account executive, meeting together on a weekly basis to discuss pipeline creation, etc., right? The stretch is much less big for that account executive to take on your deals, instead of having to go to an account executive that's unfamiliar with the region or the territory, or that's unfamiliar with the particular vertical that you're working in. Another really good reason to do something like this is, for example, retainment, right? Giving the people ownership over that particular region, make it almost like a shop within the shop, right? It's going to increase
Yeah.
responsibility, but also it's going to increase retainment. People are going to feel much more, they're going to feel much more closer to that particular side of the business because they own that, right? They almost work autonomously on that side of the business. So it will definitely help with retainment as well.
I love the the word you keep saying there is ownership, right? Ownership in their segment of the business and their territory and their region, just in their work. And that's so important because not a lot of people, when they're looking for a new job, I can say from the recruitment front, they don't say that out loud. They don't beg for tons more responsibility or ownership. But the ones that have that always stay and are always much more happy and motivated in their jobs, right? It's like fundamental to someone's career progression is getting to a point where as a senior level employer, especially in a selling role where you're very commercially driven, is you want to have ownership and you want to see the derivative of the impact that you're making on the work you're doing, like day to day. That's so interesting.
100%.
It's almost a very it's like doubling down on the entrepreneurial nature of an organization. You're almost essentially building little businesses inside of a greater sum. I know that maybe that's simplifying it too much, but would you say that's kind of in action how it is?
Well, here's the thing, right? And you probably know this better than I do, right? But we all want this rough diamond, right? We all want this top
Yeah.
performer while scaling, right? We still want to have the
Yeah.
best people in the market, but then what do they get in return from us? Just to be employee number 1,800? That's not good enough for these people anymore, right? Because what they want,
No.
if you want these high performance, like these rough diamonds that I was mentioning, right? You need to give them something
Yeah.
in return, right? And that's what you were mentioning, right? That's the sense of ownership, the sense of responsibility that you can give them in return.
Right. 100%. How do you implement this? Say you come into a business, I'm guessing there's two instances, and correct me if I'm wrong, but early stage businesses just risen their first round of funding. They are probably building their first go-to-market team for the first time, right? And I think that maybe is a bit more advantageous because you can build on top of a blank slate. But I know you also come into a lot of legacy businesses that have been around for years, have some sales organization, have legacy sellers, and you have to change the culture and implement this. How do you go about that? Because I can imagine it's quite difficult to change pace that rapidly.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, I think something that we also need to keep into mind is that we should be very cautious when we make organizational changes, right? It can have very big implications both on the organization, on revenue, on the individuals involved, right? And I also believe that if you do something like this, you cannot just 6 months later say, okay, this is not for us. We're gonna return back to our old structure. To maybe
You got to commit.
exactly, and you can also not say, oh, we're temporarily gonna change back to the old system, to then 6 months later, when we've all figured it out, try it again, right? That doesn't work. I believe there's something something that's called change fatigue, right? I believe that people get tired of too much change, and then the whole purpose of retaining your talent is actually out at the door, and people will leave, right? So, in order to implement a pod structure successfully in an organization, I think there's a few things that we need to keep in mind. Firstly, we need to start at modeling out what this should look like for your organization, right? And when I say modeling out, I'm talking about what should this pod be doing in terms of new business? How much new business can we expect from this pod? How much existing business is fair to expect from this pod? What does that mean in terms of number of opportunities, right? How many opportunities are we going to need? And we're coming back to the beginning of this conversation, right? It's all about data,
Yeah.
right? We need to understand how many deals do we need? And then consequently, right, how many SQLs are we going to need? How many leads our SDRs are going to have to reach out to, right? So in order for this to work, you need to have a really good understanding of the math behind it, right? Then secondly, we always advise to start this by means of a proof of concept. So don't go for this big bang strategy where tomorrow everybody's working in a pod structure, because if there's, for whatever reason, something not working out for your organization, you want to find that out at a small scale rather than at a big scale, obviously. So we say start with a proof of concept, take 2 or 3 salespeople, take 2 or 3 SDRs. Again, that's where the math come in, right? Like you need to understand how many SDRs are going to be able to feed those 2 account executives. No less than 2, right? So always 2 or 3 account executives. 2 or 3 SDRs/MDRs, depending whether your business is an inbound-led or an outbound-led company, or a combination of the two if it's both inbound and outbound-led. And then learn from your first pod, right? Understand, hey, what are the kind of challenges that our pods run into? What is working for these pods? And what do we need to steer by in order to make this pod work? And this is the beauty of pods, right? What are we going to do next? We're going to split up the pod. So we're going to take out the 2 account executives in that initial pod. We're going to take out the two SDRs, right? And the account executive is going to pair up with one of these SDR, but there's a new account executive coming in and a new SDR coming in. And the other 2 account executive and SDR are also going to be paired with a new SDR and a new account executive. And what are we seeing now? We have 2 new pods that are actually already enriched with the knowledge and the learnings, right, from that proof of concept. And this is what I love about pods. It's so scalable. If we want to add a new region or if we want to add a new vertical, all we need to do is just take 1 or 2 of the resources out of the existing pod, add them into a new pod, and then hire additional resources to come into that new pod. And everything is there. The knowledge on how it works, the systems, how to use the systems, how to do the math, et cetera, right? So the stretch for you as an organizational leader is not significant.
What is the tough part about this, Jeremy? It sounds all too good to be true. What are some of the challenges you face in implementing this? I can imagine having the right leadership I guess set in place for each of these pods is probably an interesting endeavor, because it's almost like, as you raise the emphasis of the ownership of this group and it acting as a sufficient or self-sufficient business unit, et cetera, it's almost like the leader of said pod is almost like their own little CEO in a way, leading that group commercially, at least. Is that a difficult endeavor, preparing or finding and enabling leadership to do well at that sort of level?
Yeah, it's going to require the leaders to take on a new role, right? It's different from what they're used to doing. But also for leaders, they're going to see much more motivated team members, right? I think where leadership comes in this whole story of pods is they are kind of like the facilitators, right? They need to ensure that we have the right people working in the right pods, that they are enabled, right, with data, that they are enabled with best practices on how these pods are working for your organization. But in addition, there's also pieces of their old job that they are going to continue to do, going to have to continue doing, which is skill development, for example, right? Which is crucial in these kind of organizations. Skill development is one of the most important aspects of a good manager anno 2022. Opportunity coaching, they're still going to have to do that, right? They're still going to have to do the opportunity coaching. But what we want to step away from is that we want account executives to be working in that metrics organization very horizontally in silos without having a clear understanding, having clear handovers, with their peers on either pre-sales and marketing side, and with customer success and account manager on the post-sales side.
We talked a lot about, that's a good point, cross-functional team members and revenue operations teams, considering things like actual revenue or sales operations, and then customer success and marketing. We talked a lot about how you build the sales orgs. How do marketing and customer success come into this play? Do you spread those amongst pods as well, or is that more of a corporate strategy?
No, absolutely. I think for a regional approach, a definite absolutely, right? So for a regional approach where, especially over here in Europe, right, we are not as fortunate as you guys that we have a huge country that all speaks the same language, right? I think that local presence and having an understanding of the cultural challenges, having an understanding of the language is over here something that's really important. So an account-based marketeer or a marketeer that can help you with relevant content in your region, that can help you with relevant events in your region is crucial, right? And if we see that we cannot, and this is also something that I love about this pod structure, if we see that a marketeer cannot get a full-time job out of supporting one pod, it supports 2 pods, right? So it's active in pod A and in pod B, and marketeer 2 is active in pod C and D. And the same goes for an account manager, for example, right? If we don't have enough accounts to keep one account manager or a solution consultant busy, a solution consultant could work over 2 pods. Same for,
and that's naturally scalable.
exactly, yeah. And the same for post sales, right? I love having post sales involved because, again, that's where this this knowledge sharing comes in, right? If post sales works closely together with the sales team, it has a really good understanding of what's coming their way, right? They are completely up to date as about what is it kind of impact that this customer is looking for, because they've been hearing the account executive and the SDR talk about this opportunity for weeks in advance before that opportunity was landed, right? So there's lines are very close between sales and post sales, and you are completely up to date about what is it that we need to do for that customer. And also back all the way back from account management back to marketing back to sales development, what is the best way to understand what it is that the customers take away from a product, what the impact is that we deliver. That's, of course, speaking with your customer, but of course, we don't want to bother our customer 24/7 with requests about impact, etc. But who speaks with our customer frequently? That's our account manager, right? So let's keep lines between marketing and sales development close when it comes to account managers, so that they can feed off those people to build content and to create relevant sequences to reach out, etc., etc.
I mean, there's just a wealth of benefits to this stuff, from the ownership, responsibility, to the motivation, to the concentricity of communication between all the different revenue groups. It's kind of remarkable. It's really interesting, and it's really simple at the same time. Do you have any, I guess the last question I had written down for us, and then we can sort of go off from there, key principles in terms of how leadership specifically at the highest level, whether it's a CEO or CRO, if they have one, guiding these pods to success long-term, right? And sort of their endeavor here?
I think it all comes back to the data, right? That's just key here. You need to do your math and you need to measure the entire pod. That means you need to understand revenue numbers, volume numbers, right? Number of MQLs, number of SQLs, number of onboardings, number of expansions, etc., and conversion, right? And that last piece is really important to understand. How can we scale this, right? How can we, what I referred to at the beginning of our conversation, right? In order for it to be scientific, we need to measure everything, and the way that you measure progress is by means of these conversion rates, right? And these conversion rate, for example, given, right, the number of SQLs that turn into a customer, right? That's your conversion rate. We call that conversion rate 4. And that's your win rate ultimately, right? So we need to measure these kind of aspects of the pod performance in order to understand, how is this pod performing? Individually benchmark that, right? These benchmark numbers should probably be close to each other across teams. If we see that a conversion rate is off in one region versus another, we need to look into that, right? And that's the key here, right? In order to make this scalable and make this work over a long amount of time, we need to understand exactly what's happening and look at that continuously, right? So continuously measuring and continuously adjust based on best practices, based on the data, based on the input that we're getting from the team. So that's really, really key. And the second thing, also something I mentioned already, start small, right? Please do us the favor of not, introducing this with a big bang, as exciting as it can get, but really start small with a couple of account executives, a couple of SDRs, potentially add in a marketeer, customer success and account management, or whatever your motion might look like post sales, and then start adding on additional pods before, getting the whole go-to-market team on your pod structure.
You can't be too quick with it. No, you're right. Embarrass us all. In my head, and sort of a topical question, this idea or concept of pods and more macro, just the scientific nature of leading your sales organization through quantifiable means, as well as the qualifiable stuff, or qualitative stuff, excuse me. I can imagine that these types of organizations that are led by science, that are led by data, and that are broken down into these more centric pods that have more ownership, they're much more stable over time. And I think that is such an important theme, especially in the world that we've gone through in the last 24, 36 months, where sales organizations, unfortunately, the bad ones have been up and down and up and down and up and down, from COVID to lockdowns to we're all back and we're all selling like crazy. And now it's a lockdown again. And now there's a recession. And now there's not a recession. Like, it's very dramatic. And I can imagine, and these are conversations I have a lot with CEOs on the recruitment front, is they want retention in the effort of finding more stability in their revenue organizations. And this structure, I can imagine, does the same. Have you seen that sort of trend? Does this realistically add more stability over a long amount of time and give a better foundation to grow and, I guess, waver through all these waves that we've gone through?
Yeah. And I would even like to add to that is that, when we speak, and we do this a lot, right? We speak a lot with VCs, and we speak a lot with PEs, and what they are saying is the time that we were giving away money at crazy valuations is at least temporary. It's over, right? And if we ask them what is it that you want to see, is exactly what you are saying, right? We want to see consistency. We want to see exactly that these people know what they're doing, and that's visible in the data, right? And we want to have an understanding, or we want to get an understanding from them how they're going to get to sustainability, right? And all of this is completely unpredictable if A, you don't have the right people in house, and B, you're not measuring what you need to measure. And I think POTS is a great means to get that consistency into your organization. And the only thing you need to do then is just start measuring, continue to measure, so that you have an understanding of how your business is performing. And that's going to allow you to get a great understanding of how do we get to profitability, and when are we going to get there, more or less.
Yeah, 100%. Do you have any, I guess, takeaways to sort of put a cap on this, Jeremy, in terms of trends in the market, in terms of what direction that you see revenue organizations going into, and I guess why they should be more eager to adopt something like this in terms of a scientific way of running their sales orgs?
I think for their own peace of mind to start. But
there's no peace of mind in sales. Yeah, there's none of that.
No, but like I was saying, I think times are changing, and times are changing rapidly, right? Burning money at the pace that we've been doing that in the past is over. VCs, PE firms are going to want to see profitable organizations rather sooner than later. They're going to want to hear from us out here how we're doing that, and I think that all starts with measuring things, right? So I think that's my takeaway for anybody that I speak with today, right? If you don't have a clear understanding of what you're doing and how that impacts your organization, go fix that first.
Yeah, absolutely love it. Well, thank you so much for this, Jeremy. I know we're coming up on time. I think this was tremendous conversation, and I got a lot of valuable takeaways. Where can the people find you? Is there anything you can plug in? Can they reach out to you on LinkedIn or something of the source to discuss?
I encourage everybody to hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to jump on a call, and keep an eye out. I'm trying to get these thoughts all in some form of a book. Not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but if you're interested, then keep an eye out for that as well.
Love it. Thank you, everyone. This is another episode of the GTM Kickback. I'm your host, Joey Brodsky, and we will see you again soon.